So, in the lead up to the Lost Metal, I want to go over pretty much everything that has to do with Mistborn as preparation for the Lost Metal. So, to finally cap off our Era 1 discussion, I want to talk about Secret History. And later on, we're going to do a character tier list too, so I can talk about my favorite characters from Era 1. So, yeah, with that being said, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let's begin. So, Secret History. Secret History is really the story of what happens after the final empire, after Kelsier dies. So, we immediately follow his perspective from the moment when he dies at the hands of the Lord Ruler on to his new adventures as a cognitive shadow. Because immediately what happens is his soul is ripped from his body and he goes to the cognitive realm in for Skadriel, which is just this misty, cloudy area that like has no real form, but it's kind of like a shadow version of the regular world. But everything's like made of mist and stuff, and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. At least immediately. The longer time Kelsier is there, the more his eyes seem to adjust, and he starts to understand what he's seeing and everything. So he's able to like recognize Luthadel and everything like that. So it's really interesting how immediately we get to see his experience of life after death. And when I initially read this book, the very first time going through the Ars Arcanum, I was really just fascinated because this shows another side of the Cosmere. It shows another side of the way, the reality of this world works. We already had some hints of shades more in Stormlight Archive and stuff, but the sub-astral on Skadriel is like totally different because it's, based off of different minds on a different planet. So it's a really interesting idea the way he shows up there and is like there, but he's kind of being pulled away. So what happens functionally is the mind of the person will go into the cognitive realm until they are pulled back into the spiritual realm and basically be erased as investiture energy. At least that's the way I see it. No one really knows what happens when they go into the beyond. But Kelsier almost immediately meets God. He meets preservation, the God who essentially wanted humanity, because the other God, Ruin, didn't necessarily want humanity. He didn't really have a greater opinion on it. But a part of preservation's duties, he sees it as his responsibility to see each soul pass on to the next area. But Kelsier doesn't want to pass on. He needs to figure out what's going on. He immediately goes into plan mode like he's with the crew and like tries to figure a way out of it. And after a bunch of Finfangle like running around and stuff and trying, he basically convinces preservation to preserve him in order to essentially make him a cognitive shadow. Of course, Kelsier doesn't know any of this at the time, but that's essentially what happens. But during this process, he ends up getting trapped in the Well of Ascension. He basically uses that as a line of power that keeps him as a cognitive shadow. But as a result, he's trapped within that area. So essentially, for the next few books, Kelsier is just completely trapped in one location. So the rest of, I believe, Well of Ascension, the rest of the entire book of the Well of Ascension, Kelsier is trapped at the Well of Ascension until Ven takes up the power, which releases him. So it's really interesting the way we kind of see everything from this other end. So all the little mysterious things that happened during Era 1 and those second two books, like the Mist Spirit and stuff like that, and like different events and just different little whispers and stuff that we would hear and all that kind of stuff. It's all explained now as being basically Kelsier with preservation trying to do everything that he can to help Ven and Ellen and everyone with their effort to save the world. So he's just kind of going through and doing stuff, but at the same time of trying to help them, Kelsier is also being Kelsier. He sees that, okay, preservation is dying, so I need to see how I can take this power, because not only will it help save everyone back in Skadriel, but it will, give him power, because Kelsier always wants power. He's actually a very, very selfish person, and it takes him, I don't think he ever learns the lesson that a selfish person like him needs to learn because of what we know happens later in the timeline. So it's really interesting. He's one of my favorite characters from Mistborn Era 1, and I love the greater expansion on his, not history, but, his afterlife, I guess. Yeah, his after regular life. So it's a lot of fun to see him continue going on. And after he gets out of the Well of Ascension, he starts to become more active. Well, active is a hard term to use, but he becomes more of a participant in all the things that he's, meddling in. So he's paying attention to Ruin. He's trying to understand Ruin's plans and stuff while trying to help find some way to preserve preservation, ironically. Even though preservation is already technically dead, he's just, the way investiture and everything works, and it's a little extra complicated. So he's kind of dead while not being dead. Kelsier's trying to save him, even though it's technically too late and all that stuff. So we get a lot of Cosmere expansion in this story as well. So at one point, Kelsier is trying to help Preservation, and Preservation basically tells him the only real way we could possibly do anything like you're planning, which is to take up Preservation's power when Preservation finally dies. He says he needs a greater connection to Preservation's power because Kelsier is technically more ruined than he is Preservation. So Preservation essentially tells him there's this group called the IRE that have potentially what you need that would build a greater connection to me that would allow you to do this. Actually, no, he doesn't learn it from Preservation. He learns it from basically getting a glimpse of the spiritual world. Preservation is able to give the Kelsier a glimpse into the spiritual world and see the full eternity that he represents. He does it kind of as this like punishment thing to try to get Kelsier to understand who he is actually talking to. But then, like, in the moment of being shocked and amazed and stuff, Kelsier also gets a glimpse of information when he gets exposed to the spiritual world. So he's like, oh, wow, this is amazing. You are infinite and everything. You are truly God. But then he's like, oh, also, wait a minute. What's that one thing? Do it again. Like, so he does it again, and he gains just enough information so that he can figure out what to do with the IRE. So he goes essentially off-world. He goes far enough into the Scadrial sub-astral that he is essentially in space, I think. He is in the void between planets where there's less thoughts. So the sub-astral doesn't have much detail or anything there. So he's like very much on the outskirt, I think, of his solar system or of his planet area where he finds them. Because they're all watching the death of Preservation from a very far distance. And through some just hilariously funny kind of machinations, Kelsier manages to trick this entire group of total immortals who probably know information about the Cosmere that we will all just die to know, that just probably have just long-lived lengths of information and just so much effort and everything. He manages to trick them with just some of the simplest stuff. He like basically pretends to be a ghost, making them think that he's ruined, and like he's getting them to like mistrust each other and like abandon each other and all this stuff till they eventually drop the orb that has this liquid that would connect him more to Preservation. So the entire thing is so simple, but it's so brilliant because people on that level probably wouldn't think of something as simple as he did, and they wouldn't think about the idea of a cognitive shadow just basically being a ghost. So it's just a lot of fun that Brandon did that, and I really like that part of the book. And of course, this plan does work, where Kelsier then ends up taking up the power of Preservation. But because he is not alive, he doesn't have a connection to the physical world. He doesn't have access to the full breadth of ability that he should have holding this kind of power. So he can't really do anything to stop Ruin. He just has a better vantage point to watch everything that's happening. So it just continues on like that, and we kind of see he's trying to just do greater influences and stuff to help Vin and help everyone else out and everything, until eventually everything that happens in the Hero of Ages happens, and essentially the moment before Vin goes and absorbs the mist, Kelsier is basically spat out by the power, and the power all goes to Vin, and she ascends. So he gets to watch it from the cognitive realm and everything. He gets to see all this amazing stuff happen with a greater intimate connection to it because the power knows him, so now it knows her. So she kind of has an extra connection back to Kelsier. So it kind of has this kind of cool, like, final goodbye kind of feel to it. And there's also an actual final goodbye later when Vin actually kills Ruin and destroys both herself and I can't remember who the shard holder of Ruin is. But when she essentially destroys herself and Ruin, then she goes to the cognitive realm where Kelsier is, and she finally gets to say a final goodbye, her and Ellen. And it's amazing. And he, from the cognitive realm, after Vin goes to the spiritual realm, gets to watch Sazed pick up both powers. And it's a really cool scene where he gets to see the entire world get remade. He's walking through the world as it's changing and all this kind of stuff. It's a cool image. But one of the most interesting things that comes out of Secret History is the fact that Kelsier is the survivor, and he is kind of a D-bag, so he will always continue to try to do what's in his best interest. Even if he has the opportunity to see his wife again if he goes to the spiritual realm, he just still doesn't do it. He still just wants to continue to survive. And since he held the power of preservation for a while, he gained a great amount of knowledge. He gained so much information, similar on level of the Lord Ruler. He held the power technically longer than the Lord Ruler, so he now knows more about hemalurgy than the Lord Ruler did. So he essentially, it's implied by the end of Secret History that he has found a way to stable his cognitive shadow onto a physical body and technically come back to life. So we see him with one spike in his eye, and like he's alive somehow, and we don't really understand. But there's clues in other Cosmere books as to what he's been doing. So Secret History is a lot of fun. I really, really like it. I love the expansion of the Cosmere. I love the continuation of Kelsier because he's my favorite character that's not necessarily good. I think he would probably be more like chaotic neutral or like something like that on the spectrum of morality. So you think, yeah, chaotic neutral is probably accurate for Kelsier, but he's one of my favorite characters to read about. I love that Brandon keeps like pulling him back in every so often, and his entire shtick is that he's a survivor. So it makes a lot of sense that he continues to survive, and it means that we would definitely see him again. So I can't wait till the next time we run into the Lord of Scars, and the next time we see like some interesting thing that he does. So yeah, that ends my discussion of Mistborn Era 1. I hope it was rambly enough and up to par for my normal stuff. And I hope it like generates more conversation and stuff and allow you all to think about Era 1 as we go into the most recent book of Era 2. So we're going to take the context of Era 1 and then we're going to apply it to Era 2, and we're going to see how much that helps me enjoy Era 2 a lot more than it did the very first time I read it. So yeah, with that being said, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and leave me a comment down in the comment section below, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.